Wilderness seasons. Just the sound of that word, you can tell it's dry, it's arid, it's barren, it's confusing, lifeless, sometimes times in our life that seem void of any purpose. These are times actually that all of us go through and encounter. But why? Is there a purpose behind it? And where is God in all of it? I want to share these things with you in a way that I know is going to help you. So all of us go through different times in our lives. Sometimes these seasons can last years, where it seems like there's just not a lot of purpose, or where we just are going through the motions. There just doesn't seem to be much life going on. These are called wilderness seasons. We just kind of go through the motions. We're looking for something to bring purpose back, and we just can't seem to find it. And I want to, first of all, encourage you that you're not alone in this. Everybody goes through times like this, myself included. And we see plenty of examples in the Bible of people who have gone through just this very thing. But there is such hope that I'm going to offer today, because there actually is purpose in these times that feel so dry and barren and meaningless. Today, I'm going to give you 3 different scenarios and real-life examples of what a wilderness season can look like. And I've experienced each of these that I'm about to describe to you at different times in my life. The first example of a wilderness experience is that you get a promise from God. You get a sense of a direction, somewhere He's leading you. And you start to move in that direction, and then it seems like the exact opposite happens of what you think should happen. And it seems like everything falls apart, and you're wondering what the heck, and in fact you're crying out at times, God, why have you abandoned me? What have I done? This would be like Joseph in the Old Testament. This is Genesis chapters 37 to 50. This is a long story. I can't tell it all here, but I want to give you just a few pieces of it to help you understand what this season is like. So he was the youngest son of Jacob. He had older brothers. His father favored him and gave him a special gift, this coat of many colors, which made his brothers very angry, very jealous. He had dreams. He had dreams from God, Joseph did, about his status and how he was even going to be, his status was going to be above his brothers, his older brothers. Well, that was probably something he shouldn't have shared with them. And that's one of the problems sometimes with when we get promises from God. A lot of times our character doesn't really match yet where we need to be in order to fulfill or walk into those promises. And this is what happened with Joseph. And so he tells his brother the dreams he has. They're not happy. They actually send him away into slavery when the father's not around. And so his very own brothers betrayed him. And this is often another aspect of this wilderness season is you feel like you're doing the right things, and you even get betrayed, sometimes by family members, sometimes by people who you thought were loyal friends. So he gets sold into prison. He lands on his feet. He's in an okay place in Egypt. But then because of something that he was accused of and sent to prison for, which he didn't even do, in fact, he was trying to do the right thing. And this is another aspect of the wilderness season. You sometimes, again, you're doing the right thing, and the opposite happens. So he gets sent to prison, and he's there for a long time. Something like 11 to 13 years, most suspect. So a very long period of time where he's in prison. And again, God, where are you? And how come you're not helping me here? Eventually, he gets out of prison, jumping ahead again in his story, because he interprets a dream of Pharaoh, the ruling leader of Egypt. And he interprets his dream this way. He says there's going to be 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. And this famine's going to be bad. So now set up storage areas, store your food because you're going to need it. And that dream, not only the dream interpretation, not only was accurate, but it saved millions of people, Egyptians and Israelites together. So what do we take from this story? God had a greater purpose for Joseph than Joseph even knew. When he got those dreams as a boy, he didn't know why God was going to elevate him into a place of prominence. He didn't know that yet. He had to go through some very tough things in life. And in that, I know that God was working on his character, his heart, his ability to trust God. God had to have someone who would trust God for the dream interpretation, for the things that would help an entire nation. This is what you need to know about wilderness seasons. You're going to see this again and again in the examples that I give, is that it's for so much more than you or the person going through it. In this case, Joseph. It wasn't just about him. It was about God preparing him and his heart to help many, countless people around him. And in the end, Joseph forgave his brothers after all this time. Can you imagine? If God hadn't worked on his heart, Joseph would have had a decade or more to just chew on the bitterness. And man, when I get my hands on my brothers, especially now that I'm back in power again, man, I'm going to show them. But no, he had a soft heart. It says here that Joseph said to his brothers, "Don't be afraid." Because they suddenly realized that this leader was their little brother Joseph. He said, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." There you go. And I propose to you that Joseph would not have been able to forgive his brothers with that kind of a soft heart and reconnect and have a restored family if God had not done deep things in his heart during that wilderness encounter. The second example I want to give you is this, that sometimes the wilderness and the wilderness seasons, they can look like doing something horribly wrong and then falsely assuming that your life is finished, especially as far as anything of value for God or for his kingdom, doing something that's going to be noble or help people, like, oh, you know what? I've made such a mess of things. My life has blown apart. God can't use me. I'm done. This would be like Moses. Now, Moses, again, skipping way ahead in his story because we don't have the time for the long version. But Moses, as an adult, he was also in a place of leadership. He was trying to help someone and ended up killing another person who was injuring the one he was trying to help. He knew he was in deep trouble. Like, if I stick around here, my life's going to be over. I'm going to be imprisoned or worse. So he ran. He hightailed it. And you know what he did? He actually began a whole nother life out in the desert, out in the wilderness. That time that he was out in that desert hidden was about 40 years. And in that time, he got married. Had a family. He was raising sheep, he was tending to his flocks and herds. He was done with whatever it was that he was in a leadership position before in Egypt. He was done. Now, here's the thing, though. Even though he was trying to live his life in obscurity, and again, this is what some of us do. This is a different kind of wilderness where sometimes we cause the problem initially of something that just blew up, and then we disqualify ourselves and try to hide out in obscurity. Well, nobody will know me. Here's the thing, is that God knows you and knows right where you are. God knew where Moses was. And so at just the right time, 40 years later, after hiding in the desert, comes the burning bush moment, and God says, Moses, I'm choosing you to lead my people out of Egypt. Now, Moses had all kinds of reasons why he couldn't do it, excuses. But in the end, God said, no, you're my man. You're not disqualified. I've always known where you are. And in the 40 years where you thought all you were doing was living life in obscurity and just doing the mundane, I was actually doing good things in your heart. I was working on issues of your heart so that you could be the very one who would say yes to my request and who would do what I say as I help you lead an entire nation out of slavery. Once again, do you see, this wasn't just about Moses, was it? This wilderness time, it wasn't just for Moses' sake. It's because God was preparing him for something much greater, and that was going to impact millions of people. I'm trying to get across the same message to you, that this is for much greater purposes than we know when we go through these hard, barren, purposeless, seemingly, times of our life. And in this case, too, when Moses does lead the people out, guess what? They go into their wilderness experience for another 40 years because they weren't ready yet to inherit what God wanted them to have. They had mindsets from being slaves for 400 years that didn't fit God's freedom mentality for them to enjoy what he had for them. So he was working on their hearts during that time, the people, his people. And guess what? Moses was the perfect one to lead them because he had just gone through his own wilderness time. So I want to say to you, maybe you've already been through a dry, arid wilderness time, or maybe you're finding yourself in the middle of it. Not only is it for more people than just yourself, but you're going to be able to help others through their tough, dry, aimless times. So take heart. God is always with you. He's never left you. He knows exactly what he's doing in your life. And the third example is this, that sometimes a wilderness season has nothing to do with something you've done wrong or trying to hide or anything like that, but it's simply God's choice. God is orchestrating a time for you to leave behind distractions or the way you've known things to be, to discover something deeper. He's going to show you your truer divine identity, your authority in him, so that you can know what's true, so that you can know what the lies are that you're going to say no to that would bring destruction to your life. I went through a time like this just a few years ago. It was beautifully painful. It was painfully beautiful, and I wouldn't have it any other way. It was a season, several months where God just kind of pulled me aside from everything I was doing and started to reacquaint me with the truth of who I really was, and really just pull apart, disjoint any remaining lies that would send me down paths that would be destructive. I'm so grateful for it. The example I want to give you from the Bible is Jesus himself. Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tested by the devil. Wait, Jesus was led into the wilderness? Yes, he was, by the Spirit. Yes. Remember this, right before this, Jesus had just come out of the baptismal waters. The Spirit had descended upon him. The Father says, "This is my beloved Son. This is the one in whom my soul delights, that I take such pleasure in." Jesus just had this amazing moment of affirmation, and still was led by the Spirit. There was still more that Jesus had to be prepared for what was coming. You're thinking, what, Jesus? He's the Son of God. He doesn't need any more preparation. Look at this verse. It says, "But even Jesus had to grow in wisdom, in maturity, in favor with God and with people." Even Jesus had to grow in this way. Why? Because Jesus was actually lived life for us to follow. And so this is just showing that Jesus had to choose to yield himself to his Father and to the Spirit, the life of the Spirit living through him. And this is what actually led to Jesus being able to say, even going to the cross, not my will, but yours be done. How did he do that? Because he got to such a place of trust and intimacy with his Father through time with his Father. But it even happened in this 40 days in the wilderness where the enemy was testing him with lies like, well, is your Father really going to take care of you? And if he cared, he would provide for you. All the things that were just lies. And Jesus had to know. He had to know his Father's heart deeply in order to not be lured into those lies. This is the beauty of what Jesus did for us. He went to the cross, not only for us and for our forgiveness, but he did it as us, meaning he included us in his death, in his resurrection. Do you see again that the testing, the wilderness, the desert time that Jesus went into was not just for him, but it was for multitudes of others. In this case, Jesus' death and resurrection, it was for all of humanity. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. So these are 3 examples of what a wilderness season can look like. It can look even different than what I described. What I really want you to hear in this is that God is faithful, that he never leaves you, and that his purposes are so much bigger than you know. So yes, there is a purpose in the wilderness. And it's interesting, I've mentioned the number 40 many times, right? Moses in the desert 40 years, then leads the Israelites through the wilderness for 40 more years. Jesus led by the Spirit into the wilderness for 40 days. What is the significance of that number 40? It's actually very significant, and it signifies new life, new growth, transformation, redemption, and a change from one great task to another great task. And how is this transformation going to happen? It's got to be a work of God's Spirit, because we can't change ourselves. You've heard me say that so many times. Yes, we can partner with God by saying yes, but we can't change ourselves. That's a work of God. So the Spirit is working in us during these times when it seems like nothing's happening. But in actuality, something deep and profound is going on, so much so that you come out of that time, the wilderness desert time, and you're a different person. It's like a 2.0 version of yourself, a more true version of yourself. To bring a little bit more insight to this, I want to explain to you the word for desert and tie it into another word that's the same root word in Hebrew. So the word for desert is midbar in Hebrew. And which means desert or wilderness. It's a wild field where wild animals live, in contrast to a cultivated field. Okay, so that's what that word means. Then the root of that is MDBR, because there are no vowels in Hebrew. So there is another word that has the same root, MDBR, which means they're linked in an important way. And that word is medaber, MEDABER. It means speaking. Medaber, speaking. Midbar, desert, medaber, speaking. So what's the correlation? God is speaking to you in the wilderness. Do you see this? In the wild places of your heart that haven't been cultivated yet. He's going to those places and saying, would you give me access there? Because I'm doing a beautiful work in your heart, not just for you, but it's going to help many others around you. And we know that sometimes our most powerful experiences and in connections with God actually are in the desert, the dry times of our lives. Really, we can look back and see, oh God, that's when I needed you the most. So the wilderness it's a place of encounter. It's a place where God reveals the priorities of our hearts and helps to rearrange them if needed. It's a season of letting go of old things so that you can embrace something new. It's sometimes a time to face discomfort. A lot of times we don't want to. We just keep ourselves busy, and I'll just watch more movies, more TV. I'll numb out in some way so I don't have to think about things. And God says, no, can we actually ponder some of the things that have discomfort in your heart? Because there's some deeper works of healing that I'm doing there, if you'll let me. And this is also a time when God will lead you to rekindle the flame of love for Him in your heart. Listen to this verse. It says, therefore, I am now going to allure her, and I will lead her into the wilderness, and I will speak tenderly to her. So He's going to, in this verse, He's going to lead us into the Midbar, the desert, and there He's going to medaber, speak tenderly to our hearts. Do you see? It's all right there in the same verse. This is what God is doing. And for what purpose? There I will give her back her vineyards. That's your fruitfulness in life. And I will make the valley of Achor, which means the valley of trouble, a door of hope. He's giving you a new door to walk through that's filled with hope. And there she will respond or sing as in the days of her youth, as in the days she came up out of Egypt. He's talking about the Israelites who He rescued out of slavery. In other words, we're going to remember the times when God has faithfully led us out of places in our lives where we were imprisoned, where we were locked into our own destruction, or something was happening to us and God rescued us. In that day, declares the Lord, you will call me my husband. You will no longer call me my master. Do you see? God's not interested in a master-slave relationship. Not at all. He says, no, I always just wanted you to know me as in an intimate way as the one who always cares for you, is a true friend, will never leave you, will never forsake you. But it takes life experiences for us to get to a place to actually believe that. And here is such a beautiful picture of what that looks like. Who is this coming up out of the wilderness, leaning on her beloved? Friends, it's you and me. This is the purpose. We come out of the wilderness times, the dry times, the desert times, the times that feel like there's no purpose. In the midst of it, something happens. And the troubles, at some point, there's a door of hope. And God brings us through, but not just in a slave-master relationship. He doesn't want that. He brings us up leaning on Him and knowing how trustworthy He is, and our heart's affection is on Him. This is what's going on. So just know that whenever you go through wilderness seasons, maybe you're in one right now, I don't know. God does, and God knows right where you are. There's nothing you could do that has disqualified you. He's smarter than that. He's more brilliant than that. His plans, the way He can weave plans into preparing your heart for what is to come, not just for your sake, but for those around you, is nothing short of brilliant and always good. This is the Father that you can trust with your life. This is the one who will speak to you even in the desert times.